The 2024 presidential race is in full swing. I know it used to be, the presidential race will start after Labor Day. Not anymore. We already have declared candidates on the Republican side of the aisle. President Trump, of course, famously declared his reelection campaign in November of last year. We've had Ron DeSantis still bandying about the idea of running for president. Tim Scott, senator from South Carolina, has stated he is creating an exploratory committee to explore the idea of running for president. We got Asa Hutchinson running. We have Nikki Haley has declared her candidacy. Joining us now to discuss the Republican primary season is our conservative friend Stacy Washington, host of Stacy on the Right. Stacy, how are you doing this evening?
Thank you for having me on tonight.
Thank you. And so, Stacy, you've been involved in Republican politics as long as I have known you. What is kind of the outline for these candidates who are not President Trump when it comes to having a pathway to securing the nomination?
Well, I think what we're seeing is a huge discussion that's going on within the GOP about the direction of the party and about the viability of, obviously, the Trump campaign, which I feel is very viable, but those conversations are happening online, on Twitter, and then there's a lot of comparison. Which of these candidates is strong enough to go up against President Biden, who has historic lows on his polling, but is still very strong because the entire Democrat Party is behind him, even as people like Charlemagne the God question whether or not the primary process is being run correctly on the left. So there's a big conversation going on, and I actually think it's far more healthy for our country in our system of government for us to have that conversation and for people to be arguing and fighting right now than it would be for us to be single-minded about any one candidate refusing to participate in the process. So this is actually good for us.
But on the Republican side of the aisle, you have people like Tim Scott, who's launched an exploratory committee. You have Nikki Haley, who is running against President Trump. But none of them have been willing to actually criticize or denounce or run against Trump. It's almost as if they're there as placeholders, as if, well, if President Trump can't run for any reason, I'm here. Are any of the Republican candidates going to actually be willing to get into a fist fight with Trump to secure the nomination? Or are they just trying to win by default in case he gets indicted?
So I disagree with you, Robert, because there have been some pretty sharp comments from Vivek Ramaswamy on COVID policy. Nikki Haley has hit former President Trump on the same topic. So there are a lot of hits that have been coming. But the real discussion about that, the real sparks will fly during the debate. So when they're on the stage together, that's when you're going to see all of them coming out for the front runner, which is President Trump. Now, you have some imagery up there of Governor DeSantis, America's governor, well loved on the right side of the political aisle, but there are some questions that he's going to have to answer. And you know that former President Trump has been attacking him pretty strongly on Truth Social and social media. So I think we're going to see the knife sharpening even more. But some of the candidates, like Senator Tim Scott, he's so well loved and widely popular, and he's actually good friends with the former president and a lot of the other people who've thrown their hat in the ring. So it's nice now, but it'll get rough.
On that point, President Trump has been known to be, a flamethrower, and he's come right out of the gate attacking Ron DeSantis before Ron DeSantis has even declared his candidacy. He basically accused Ron DeSantis of being a groomer and a pedophile. Are we going to see the Republican race get that dirty this early?
So my hope is that that's a hard no. So I'm paying attention to the policies of each of these candidates and what they actually bring to the table in the way of promises that they plan to keep if they're elected, and their viability against Biden. Biden's the actual president. He has a bully pulpit. He's the incumbent. There's a lot of power in that. He gets to take his questions from the White House press briefing room podium or the sticks on his way to and from Marine One. So we need a candidate who can approach that level of efficiency and give imagery and a sense of that of a sitting president. And I think we have great people on our bench who can do that. But we are early in the process, and so we'll see what they bring.
Now, when it comes to this issue of gravitas, kind of the difference between a sitting president and a challenger, on the one hand, you have President Trump, who, of course, has served the office before, but at the same time, he lost to Hillary Clinton by 3 million votes. He lost the midterms in 2018. He lost to Joe Biden by 7 million votes. Republicans underperformed in large part because of the Trump shadow in 2022, the proposed red wave. Is that really where Republicans should be putting all their eggs in that basket again, given the track record over the course of the last 5 or 6 years?
So I think your interpretation of those election cycles is interesting. And of course, it suits your side of the political aisle. But from where I'm sitting, when I look at the list of accomplishments of former President Trump during his 4 years in office, the list is too long for me to elucidate during our time here on this show. He had the border in a better place, the economy in a better place, and certainly voters saw him as someone who stood up for America instead of kind of receding and pulling back. We're watching our economy, bank failures, economies in the tank, recession, and we have inflation out of the wazoo. Not to leave out the fact that there are shortages and things that you can't find that were plenteous during the Trump administration. So obviously he's the front runner, and with good reason. And the most important thing that we have to look at right now is what will he do if he's president again in comparison to our current president, who is leaving a lot of people behind.
But on their point, just I don't mean to belabor the point, but we're talking about the math here. President Trump lost in 2016 by 3 million votes. He lost in 2020 by 7 million votes. So
Robert,
Republicans really be trusting in that again. And this idea, is he going to just produce 7 to 10 million more votes in 2024 versus 2020?
So, Robert, are you saying that in 2016, President Trump wasn't elected to the presidency of the United States? Because you keep talking about the popular vote totals, but we are a country that elects our president through the representative system. We're guaranteed a representative form of government by our Constitution. It's actually written down. That's how we abide. So President Trump did not lose in 2016. The midterms were not as expected, but certainly Republicans did well. And for 2020 and then 2022, Republicans took back the House of Representatives. I'm not sure if you saw that, but the Republicans control the House, and there is narrow control of the Senate. It's not like there was a big mandate there in the U.S. Senate over this last midterm election. If there was, the numbers would have been far greater on the side of the Democrats. So we see things a little differently there. The former president was elected in 2016 using the Electoral College, which is the same system. We'll be using this go around in 2024.
All right, I'm going to bring the panel in after this, but I want to ask, which of the candidates has the strongest agenda for African Americans? Which candidate has articulated a specific agenda that we talk about the numbers and the percentages of black voters voting for the Democratic Party. Which candidate has articulated a message that they think will start winning over some of those voters?
Well, President Trump had a number of programs that were fantastic for Black Americans, and those accomplishments were made during his first term, and he plans to expand upon that in a second term in 2024. I also think Senator Tim Scott is very strong on Black issues, but it's not just Black issues, is it? Is it that we as Black Americans have a certain way of living that's different from the rest of the country? Kitchen table issues for white Americans and Asians and Hispanics are the same issues that Black Americans face. We want jobs, we want safe neighborhoods, and we want an economy that's strong, that does not get in our way. We don't want to be overregulated, and we certainly don't want the government telling us what we can and can't do in our private lives. That's an agenda that the Republican Party platform supports. Not so much on the Democrat side. Look at all of the command and control structures implemented by the Biden administration that are harming Blacks, and look at the unemployment rate for Blacks, which is deleterious in comparison to what it was under former President Trump.
I want to bring in the panel for questions before we run out of time. Brianna, I know you had a question for Stacy. We're going to turn the floor over to you.
I have many questions, but I will try to keep it brief. First, I noticed that you said that you thought Tim Scott had a good agenda for Black Americans, and you specified that not just Black Americans, all Americans, which the kitchen table issues apply across the board, which will help us because we know when America has the cold, Black America has the flu, right? But I saw Tim Scott's commercial, and the first thing it did was make me cringe. So I would like for you to go in a little bit more. I would like you to go in a little bit more on what issue with economics. I would say, let's start there with just economics for Black Americans, for urban America. What specifically is Tim Scott's agenda for urban America and economics that would be different than what we have seen in the last 4 years? And then the other one is, you said Trump, and I know Trump did a lot with the opportunity zones, which we saw that there was ramifications with that too. So what specifically have you seen also in urban America and economics that would be different the last 4 years?
Okay, so you didn't specify what made you cringe about Senator Scott's announcement video, but I'll go. You did mention the economic part of the platform and the opportunity zones. So right now, under the Biden administration, since he took office, after he was elected, we've had an increase in the regulatory burden on average everyday citizens of over $14,000. And this has been tracked using government data on the regulatory burden and how that impacts Americans. So an additional $14,000 a year on every American household because of the additional regulations implemented by the Biden administration. Both Trump and Scott have a low regulatory pressure agenda. So that in and of itself saves Americans money. And then there's also the impact on inflation. When you have high inflation, that money comes right out of the pockets and bank accounts of Americans, regardless of their socioeconomic structure. So if you're on the low end, the pressure is higher for you. So couple that with the regulatory burden, and both of those Republicans that you asked about have a better agenda than the Biden administration.
And just as a way of follow-up, because before we go back, what is the specific policies that either Scott or Trump would implement to lower inflation? Currently, U.S. inflation is about 1/3 of what it is in France, a quarter of what it is in Great Britain. What would be these specific policies?
So the comparison for our country to France or any other European country is not a good comparison because those countries have a socialist paradigm and we are a free market capitalist society. So reduction in the regulatory burden and a focus on energy policy. Right now, the Biden administration is crushing our natural gas and oil industry, which is the backbone of our economy, by not allowing new natural gas leases and not permitting further exploration so that we can be net producers. We were net oil producers during the Trump administration, and under a future Republican president, regardless of who it is, we would be net oil producers again. That's a boost to the economy, and it's a reduction in the regulatory burden. So it's a 1-2 punch in reducing the amount of money that Americans don't have in their pockets to be able to spend on things that they need, like diapers shortages, formula shortages, and other things that we're paying 9 times more. The cost of eggs is 9 times higher during the Biden administration than it was under the Trump administration.
All right, we're going to go to a quick break. I want to continue this conversation on the other side. I know Dr. Malveaux and Dr. Dibinga had questions they wanted to articulate. But however, on this point of there being socialist governments in the UK has been under the conservative government for over a decade now. The last 5 prime ministers have been from the Conservative Party as opposed to Labour. So I would like to dive in a little bit about the differences between the mini budget introduced by Liz Truss prior to her resignation and before we dive in. We're going to talk about that on the other side of the break. You're watching Rolling Water, streaming live on the Black Star Network. We'll be back after the break.